If I could just set it up.
Tony, do we have everyone?
We have 4, which will give us a majority enough for a quorum, just barely.
Yeah.
I know Jonathan is not going to make it this evening.
Yeah, because I went to Walgreens and Walgreens doesn't have anything like that.
And I haven't heard from Vicky or Alec.
I wanted to go to the Dollar Tree so bad, and I just don't have energy. Jeez, Kyle.
Sounds like we got some family.
Drank it too fast.
Yeah, I heard background noise.
That's coming out of Nichols.
It's like me
Should we
hustling
wait a
my
couple
kids out.
Hey,
Should we wait a couple more minutes, Tony?
someone's had barking dogs, and other ones had the kids. I'm like, shut up, you know, kind of thing.
There's the phone ringing too.
Yeah, that was me. We can technically start. We have 4 out of 7.
So we have quorum. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good evening, commissioners, city manager. We have, okay, good evening all. Welcome to our Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Commission meeting, September 17, 2020. It is now 7 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And if Tony would help me do the roll call, please.
Yep, I have Chair Han Lin seated. I have Vice Chair Paul Ellison, or excuse me, Ellis seated. We have Don Clendenin seated. And then I have alternate Commissioner Joe Nichols, who will be seated as a primary this evening. Otherwise, on the line, we have Lieutenant Matt Miller from Milpitas PD. We have Assistant Police Chief Jared Hernandez joining us as well. And of course, City Manager Steve McCarris.
Yes. All right. The flag. Commissioner Joe, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Everybody ready?
Yep.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. Approval of minutes for the May 21st, 2020. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve. This is Paul Ellis.
There's,
Don Clendenin.
okay. So Paul made a motion and Don second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I think we have to roll call because we're not presently together. So I'm going to roll call. Joe, do you approve?
Yes, aye.
Okay, and I had Don and
Yes.
Paul, so we're good. Yep, okay, carry on.
All right. Perfect. Public forum. Members of the audience are invited to address the commission on any subject not on tonight's agenda. Speakers must state their name and address for the record and limit their remarks to 3 minutes. As an item not on the agenda, no response is required from the city staff or the commission, and no action will be taken. However, the commission may instruct the staff to place an item on the agenda for a future meeting. Announcements and correspondence. Are there any announcements?
And I'm sorry, really quick, Han, going back to public forum, we don't have any comments in the public comments email box.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, moving on to announcements. Are there any announcements?
None from OES at this time.
All right. Good, then we are going to move on to the approval of the agenda. Before asking for the motion to approve the agenda. I believe that Chief Corpus and Lieutenant Miller requested to remove item 10A under MPM 613 Warrant Service Policy. Is that accurate, Lieutenant Miller?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda except for item 10A?
I'll make a motion to accept the agenda with the proposed amendments.
Okay, and I believe Tony's gonna do the roll call on the vote.
I need to get a second on that.
Oh, yes. Is there a
Okay.
second?
Paul Ellis will second.
Okay, and then I'll do a roll. Joe's approved, Paul's approved. Don, do you approve the agenda with the amendments?
Yes.
Okay, and Han, I assume you approve?
Yes.
Very good. All ayes.
All right, thank you. Presentations.
We'll hold on PD's presentation when they actually do their, when we get to that section, if that's okay. Just because it's
Okay.
already been agendized.
All right. So we're moving on to the new business and we get back to the presentations later.
Yep, we'll be up in just a moment.
Okay. So for new business, I will give you an update on MUSD. So MUSD is planning now on the Innovation Campus. At this location, we will serve about 2,700 plus students. I shouldn't say students, learners. We will have 7 buildings with a total of 50 classrooms. This is very excited. It's gonna look great. And also on August 25th, the Health Department issued a new guidance for small group in-person targeted support. And we are now working on bringing students in person. These are for special needs students, much needed support students. And we are allowed to bring in up to 14 students with 2 adults in the classroom, but not to exceed 16 people in the room. During the month of March through August 12, we had served 299, I'll say that again, let me see. 479,000 meals to kids, plus 27,916 meals to adults, all free. And starting September through December 31st, 2020, all students' meals are free through the end of the year. While the other districts' enrollments dropped, we at MUSD increased by 130 enrollments, new enrollments. That's my report. All right, Tony, the next item's yours.
Okay. So I want to just give a brief update on what's kind of going on with the CERT program and the caches that we have. Right before the coronavirus had happened, we were looking at installing Connex boxes as caches because we were having a lot of security issues, to the point that one of the caches was broken so badly in vandalism or theft that it can't even be locked anymore. So it's rendered useless effectively. It's really just a shed at this point. So I was looking into purchasing Connex boxes, and I'd worked with the school district to identify some spots where we could put those Connex boxes on most sites that we already have the CERT caches in place. And then of course, coronavirus happened and it changed the circumstances of what we were going to be doing. So it's not off the table. It's just for obvious reasons been delayed at this point in time. Second, I did want to mention that the CERT program itself, I've had a lot of folks reach out to me interested in joining the program and getting training. The problem is, of course, as many of you know, the CERT program requires a hands-on component of it. And right now we are working with the CERT program with the state of California, who has partnered up with, I believe it's the state of Utah, who has developed an online portion of CERT. However, if I recall the hours correctly, it's 12 hours of online courses plus an additional 16 hours of hands-on training. So while it does allow to remove students from the classroom and to receive their training online, the problem is you still have a hands-on component that has to be done, which will require face-to-face close contact with another individual. So at this point, it's being reviewed. It hasn't been decided one way or the other. I personally am looking at it, and I've talked with some of my counterparts at some of the other agencies, and they're looking at pursuing it maybe in the springtime when things are moving, when we see how things play out a little bit differently, if we think we can go on hands-on training at that point in time. But again, many of you have done CERT, and as you recall, there's a lot of very close contact with one another in doing these exercises together. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and the other side too, and that is you don't want to taking the online class now, and then 6 months later, whatever the case is, now you can do the hands-on and try to remember what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it becomes a safety concern. So that would obviously be part of the reason that I'm not looking to roll it out to the public at this time. The other concern I have is I don't want people doing the online training and then thinking they're a certified individual, because then that becomes its own risk on its own. What I will likely do, in fact, I was going to sit through a training this week, and I think I had meetings that didn't work out, so I'm going to get the training link sent to me. I'm going to sit through it, and what I'm thinking I'm going to do is kind of test pilot the program with some of our current CERT members at this time, and kind of get some feedback from them, and really just use it more as a annual refresher, ongoing training component that our CERT members are required to do anyway.
Yeah, well, what I was saying is you don't want to have them take the online today, and then 6 months later, try to remember what they did then, as far as online, and then now you got to do the hands-on, and you're going, now how do we do that again?
Yeah.
I'd like to do it one right after the other so that it reinforces itself as far as education goes.
Yeah, ideally it will be something that we can eliminate some of the classroom time in the future, but then have their field time scheduled immediately following. So it'll be something that's more towards the time where we can get back to those field training exercises with the public. So now it's kind of on hold, but I am still looking into it and trying to experiment with what some of my counterparts think, what some of the other agencies are doing, and what some of our CERT members, what their thoughts are on how the program looks, the new program.
If it works out, that's going to be kind of good for those who have a busy work schedule. We're saying when it gets back to reasonable.
And for folks who miss training hours, if we have classrooms, that's always been a problem.
That way you can kind of lump it into maybe 2 days, sort of thing, as opposed to, well, we're going to stretch this thing over a week, and you got to, or whatever the case is, or 2.5 Saturdays, and that may be a schedule conflict. Or to minimize it, it's shorter.
Yeah, exactly. So unless there's other questions, I can't see everybody because we're in a format that I can't. Is there any hands up? Oh.
Yeah. Actually, Tony, I have a question and a comment. Yes. So the Connex boxes that we're considering, are these full-size Connex boxes or some scaled down smaller unit?
They are not the long extended ones. I want to say they were about 10 feet long, 8 feet wide, roughly.
Okay, so something much smaller.
It's like a half size. Yeah, I would call it a half size Connex box or mini.
So. Well, so that would be good. It would be bigger than the current caches, but obviously not huge. Yeah. Okay, and then I'll just offer a comment, and don't want to get into a big long debate, but I've been involved with a number of distance learning classes where we've done just what you're talking about with CERT, where we've broken the class into an online delivery component and then a hands-on component. And I have to tell you, it's not very efficient.
Wow.
If you have subject material that lends itself or requires handling and demonstration and that sort of thing, that's very difficult to accomplish via a web meeting. And then if you have a big separation between the lecture portion and the hands-on portion, then the hands-on portion becomes a complete relearning of what you did in the online portion. So
I agree with that.
you know, I just a comment, if there's something that I can do based on the experience that I've had with distance learning in the past 5 or 6 months, I'm willing to comment or help as I can.
I appreciate the feedback on that. Thank you. And then moving on to my next agenda item, we have Brown Act training. I just want to remind all of you, if you have not done it yet, the city attorney's office did a fantastic job putting together Brown Act training for all of us commissioners, staff liaisons. So please make sure you sit through the training, and if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If it needs to be forwarded off to the city attorney's office, I will of course do that for you if you have questions. Otherwise, I just want to remind you, if you have not done so yet, please get your Brown Act training done. And then other than that, nothing further for OES.
Thank you, Tony.
No problem.
All right.
I do see really quickly, sorry, Han, I want to say I do see Council Member Dominguez has joined us. Hi.
Good evening, everybody. So nice to see everyone.
Hi.
I see you got your green screen behind you.
You know, it is. This is the first time I don't put a background, but my little room has turned into like a studio. So I look forward to Fridays because it all goes down. But it's been a busy week. I've had a night meeting every night, but I'm super excited to see everybody. And yeah, we have a lot to do. This is gonna end up being a very important conversation. All of them are, but I think our community that is watching is definitely following some policies that this group is going to lead and make those recommendations to the city council. So I do want to thank you for your service. It's going to be a historical moment in Milpitas because of some of the policy that you guys will be directing. So I thank you guys for making those tough choices, and however I could help and assist, I'm here. Thank you so much for the chair. I love your blouse, super cute. I love the ruffles. So so nice to see everyone again. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to public safety. At this item, before you joined, Karina, we removed item A. And before we start item B, I would like to give the floor to City Manager Macaris for a few words.
Thank you. It's good to be here this evening. Chair Leanne, members of the commission. As you know, I'm your city manager, Steve Macaris. It's a pleasure to join you and to serve with you this evening, along with Assistant Police Chief Jared Hernandez and Lieutenant Matt Miller. I first wanted to acknowledge and express my appreciation for your leadership in serving on this really very important commission. Now more than ever, the Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Commission plays an extremely important role. You're helping all of the civic leaders and community understand many sides of current and very relevant social issues, in particular, how we can support, improve, communicate our efforts, policies, and practices specific to public safety. I want you to know that Police Chief Armando Corpus and I meet frequently in discussing public safety practices and continued ways to protect and care for our community, as well as protecting our women and men in uniform and keep us safe day in and day out. We both share a solid belief in the continued Milpitas legacy of strong community relationships, paying attention to our residents, and maintaining safe and equitable community partnerships. Tonight, you have a critical police department use of force policy in front of you, and we're asking for your input and feedback. When you really think about it, this is a policy that guides our police officers in the most critical moments of exercising their daily duties, preserving the peace and respect for community members who live, work, and visit Milpitas. The Chief and I, as well as the entire police department, are looking forward to our discussion tonight and truly appreciate and thank you for your input. So now I'd like to pass it on to Assistant Police Chief Hernandez.
All right, there I am. Hope everybody can hear me. So good evening, Councilmember Dominguez, Commission Chair Leanne, and Commissioners. It's good to be back in front of you with another policy presentation. I'd definitely rather do it in person, but I suppose virtual is the next best thing given COVID. Some of you may remember me, or for those that don't know me, my name is Jared Hernandez. I'm the Assistant Police Chief. I previously had the opportunity to present a couple policies to the Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Commission, our Armored Rescue Vehicle policy, and also our Unmanned Aircraft System policy. And the feedback that the Commission gave us after those presentations, it was very helpful, and it really helped us forge the final drafts of those policies. So here we are again in front of you with the use of force policy. We wanted to also present the warrant service policy, but after looking at the content that the use of force policy had, we really realized that it was too much of an ambitious goal to try to cover both policies on the same evening. So we're going to be bringing that warrant policy back to a future meeting. I'd like to thank the Commission for having us here again tonight to share what we believe to be a comprehensive use of force policy that is reflective of best practices in law enforcement. Our objective tonight is really to present the policy, answer any questions that the Commission or the public might have, and to get feedback, both positive and constructive, of the policy. As you know, it's extremely important to have a police department with a service model that is aligned with the community's expectations and values. And quite frankly, you don't see that in many other places. Given the current climate, it's really never been more important than ever to hear from the community than now, especially on such important topics like the city manager spoke of, such as use of force. We definitely cherish the opportunities to engage with the community and those others that we serve. We're proud to have a satisfaction rating of 84 and 85% the last couple of years, but really what we want to do is close that gap closer to 100%. And an important step in attaining those goals is presentations like these, forums that allow us to engage with our commissions and our citizens. So, like it or not, we plan on continuing presenting policies that might be of interest to the Commission and to the community in the future. So with that, if there are no questions before we start, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Matt Miller. He's going to be presenting the use of force policy. Matt should be touching on the legal changes that have impacted some of the modifications that you'll see in our policy. And also he'll be talking about de-escalation and what we have already been doing in the police department. So with that, Matt, I'd like you to come on up.
Good evening, everybody. Councilmember Dominguez, City Manager McHarris, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Matt Miller. I'm a lieutenant with the department here. I've been proudly serving the community and residents of Milpitas for 18 years. I'm a newly appointed lieutenant, and prior to becoming a lieutenant, I was the administration sergeant here at the department. And one of my sole duties in that role was to review our department policy manual to make sure that our policies and procedures were in line with the ever-changing state laws, either assembly bills and Senate bills. So many changes have occurred that we're going to get into in the PowerPoint. And one of the policies that I was working on at length was the use of force policy. So they felt that I was probably the most versed to speak at this, since this was the last policy I was working on before becoming a lieutenant. So I'm going to try and share my screen here. I know my children are doing Zoom classes at home, so they're probably more versed in this than I am. So please bear with me if there's any issues here. And hopefully you'll be able to see the screen. Can everyone see it?
Nope.
No?
Because it's probably on the other screen.
All right, well, we'll go with that then. We'll fix that. And how about now?
Yeah, there we go.
All right. So this evening, we're going to be talking about our Milpitas Police Department Policy Manual 300, which is our use of force policy. And what is MPM 300? And I think City Manager McHarris had a better definition of it than what I am providing, but quite simply, it's just our department's policy that provides guidelines for our officers when they are deciding to and applying objectively reasonable force in any situation. Examples of why police officers might use force include mitigating an incident, if they have to make an arrest, if they have to protect themselves or protect others from harm. So what does all of this mean? And in short, officers are tasked with keeping people in communities safe, and sometimes people don't want to comply with the laws or commands given by officers. These individuals might be dangerous. They might be dangerous to the public. And as much as we want them to go along with our commands, it doesn't always happen that way. You know, we have to keep the public safe, and we have to keep our officers safe. And there's going to be times when we have to use various force options at our disposal that are listed in the policy to gain a person's compliance. However, when force is used, it's always been our culture to use the least amount of objectively reasonable force necessary. For an example of that, an officer choosing to use control holds versus immediately going to a taser. So that's always been part of our culture here in the department. What governs our police use of force policy? And there's state laws and Supreme Court cases that actually govern that. One of them is the California Penal Code Section 835A. The other is a U.S. Supreme Court case, Graham versus Connor from 1989. And of course, we have our department policy manual, which establishes the guidelines for how our members of the organization are expected to use and apply force. 835A of the Penal Code section is the California law that gives our officers police powers and defines when an officer can use force or deadly force. And instances for that are in order to effect an arrest, overcome resistance, and prevent escape. The U.S. Supreme Court case of Graham versus Connor is what establishes guidelines to determine if the force used was reasonable. And there's three things that they look at there, and that is the severity of the crime, whether the person posed an immediate threat to safety or other officers, and whether that person was fleeing or actively resisting arrest. So why is our policy and the use of force policy changing? And one reason is Assembly Bill 392, and the other reason is Senate Bill 230. So Assembly Bill 392 is actually changing the wording of our Penal Code Section 835A, which defines when we can use force. That Assembly Bill is adding new language and is redefining when our officers can use force or deadly force. And then Senate Bill 230, that was signed into law on September 12th of 2019, but it hasn't taken effect yet. And that takes effect January 1 of next year. And what the Senate bill is it's a law that's requiring law enforcement agencies to have specific guidelines in their use of force policies. And those guidelines include having de-escalation, there's guidelines for comprehensive use of force reporting, and there's other guidelines and language that is being added or needs to be added beginning in January as a result of this Senate bill. In looking at the Senate bill, a lot of our practices and the guidelines that they're recommending being added into are practices that we've already historically been doing here in the Milpitas Police Department. So in essence, by adding the language from Senate Bill 230, we're putting our current practices actually into written policy, and that's going to be highlighted later on in some slides here. So what is the California Act to Save Lives, which is AB 392? AB 392, or the California Act to Save Lives, is actually combining the standards of state level and the federal level to be equal in terms of objective reasonableness of force. So it's combining state law with federal law. And it also is incorporating language from a California Supreme Court case from 2013 known as Hayes versus the County of San Diego. And what that is an instance where San Diego deputies actually went into residence of a suicidal man who was armed with a knife prior to taking any other steps in terms of gathering information, trying to determine if they were armed, and trying to utilize other tools at their disposal to help mitigate that threat. So when they went in, they encountered an armed subject who wasn't posing a threat to themselves, and they shot them. So that ruling is going to be seen, that the language from that ruling is incorporated into AB 392, and you'll see that, and I'll point that out here in the next couple slides. So the changes being made to our Penal Code 835A as a result of the Assembly bill is highlighted here in yellow. So it says now that an officer who has reasonable cause to believe that a person is to be arrested or has committed an offense may use objectively reasonable force. And so objectively reasonable is highlighted because the former standard was just reasonable. So it's a wording change, but now it's objectively reasonable. And objectively reasonable is based on the totality of the circumstances, which is highlighted here at the top. The totality of the circumstances presented to the officer at that time he or she decided to have to use force. So objectively reasonable and totality of circumstances are terms that we're going to see throughout the presentation, and they're used throughout our use of force policy. Another change being added as a result of AB 392 is an officer can use deadly force to defend against an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or another person. And the word imminent is highlighted because prior to that it was immediate. So imminent means it could happen versus immediate is like it's happening right now. So it's a word that's changed, but it went from immediate to imminent. And then as a result of AB 392, language is being added that says, where feasible, an officer shall, prior to using force, make reasonable efforts to identify themselves as an officer to try and get someone to comply, and also provide a warning that force might be used. So the key word here is feasible, because feasible means that if it's capable of being carried out. And there's going to be instances where they rapidly evolve, and providing a warning that force might be used wouldn't be feasible at that time. So that's a key word that's being added as well. Another change being added to our Penal Code section is directly a result of the California Supreme Court case Hayes versus the County of San Diego. And there it says, a peace officer shall not use deadly force against a person based on the fact that based on the danger that the person poses to him or herself. An example of this would be a subject standing in a field with a knife to his throat, or just holding a knife. He's not doing anything, and just because he has a knife in his hand, he might be a danger to himself, but he's not a danger to the officers at that time. So just because he's armed with a knife, we're not going to shoot someone or use deadly force as a result. So we're not using deadly force on someone if they're only posing a danger to themselves. And that is the wording and the language that resulted from that 2013 Supreme Court case. I'm sure many of us are aware of the circumstances behind George Floyd's death on May 25th of 2020. And the death of George Floyd actually prompted the review of police procedures and policies by not only members of the public, but from law enforcement as well. And as a result of the review, many suggestions were discovered that might actually reduce the number of deaths in officer-involved use of force instances. And some of those suggestions are requiring de-escalation, having a duty to intervene if an officer or a member of the department sees excessive force being used, banning chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring a warning before shooting, exhausting all alternatives before shooting, banning shooting at moving vehicles, and having a comprehensive use of force reporting system. So what does all this mean? De-escalation. De-escalation are techniques used and employed by officers to obviously try to slow things down and diffuse situations. And de-escalation has actually been intertwined throughout several of our department policies, including our TASER policy, our policy on mental illness, our policy on civil disputes, and our policy on crisis intervention incidents. However, the department recognized that we actually didn't have a standalone policy in place for our officers to go and look at and train on de-escalation tactics. So as a result of Senate Bill 230, we're now adding that in, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. Having a duty to intervene. The duty to intervene has been a part of our use of force policy actually dating back to 2011. So we've always had that since 2011. That has been part of our department policy. And what that means is that if one of our officers sees another officer using force that he or she determines to be excessive, they actually have a duty to intervene and stop it, and then go report that to a supervisor. The banning of chokeholds. Here at the Milpitas Police Department, chokeholds and strangleholds have never been trained, utilized, or authorized for our officers to use. So that has never been a part of our department policy. Requiring a warning before shooting. Historically, we actually try and train our officers to provide a warning, again, when feasible, that force was going to be used. And that's included in our TASER policy. We train our officers to do that again when time allows for a warning to be made. Exhausting all alternatives before shooting. That goes back to de-escalation and trying to diffuse situations at hand. And an example of that is allowing many officers to go to an incident and having other options to mitigate the incident at our disposal. So that's always been a part of our culture as well. The banning of shooting at moving vehicles. In our policy, it's not banned, it is discouraged. And we actually train our officers to move out of the way of moving vehicles and try to prevent having to shoot at moving vehicles. So it is a discouraged practice. And the reason why it's discouraged is because there might actually, rather than banned, is there might be instances where shooting at a moving vehicle is the only option available to an officer at that time in order to save lives of members of our community. So it's not banned, however, it is discouraged, and we do train our officers to move out of the way of said moving vehicles. And then the comprehensive use of force reporting. Historically, here in our department, we have always conducted thorough administrative reviews for any use of force incident, and that's including the use of OC spray, the use of a taser, the use of a baton, the use of hands or feet. Any of those instances are administratively reviewed. They're reviewed by a supervisor, and the review is moved up all the way to the top of our administration. And we actually conduct reviews on instances, again, such as OC spray and taser, where other departments might not. So we have always conducted thorough use of force reviews when force incidents occur. So that's always been a part of our culture here. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about the reasons why the changes are being made as a result of the Assembly Bill 392 and Senate Bill 230, let's take a look at the different policy sections specifically that are being changed in our policy. So the first one here is section 300.1.1, which provides definitions for different terms that are used throughout our policy. We've always had the definition for deadly force, and we've always had the definition of force. But now with changes being made, we're adding the definition for de-escalation. And de-escalation is simply using strategies and techniques intended to decrease the intensity of a situation. We're adding the definition for less lethal force, and that is simply force options that are less likely or not substantial or with a less likelihood of causing great bodily injury or death. We're adding the word feasible, meaning reasonably capable of being carried out or done, and that is language that is coming straight from Senate Bill 230, which is highlighted by the Government Code 7286 there at the end. Serious bodily injury. Serious bodily injury is considered if a subject loses consciousness, if bones are or suffers a bone fracture or the loss or impairment of a bodily member. This definition comes from a government code, and it's used because, and it's important to include in our manual, because if a use of force incident occurs and the person sustains a serious bodily injury as defined here in the government code, we actually report that use of force incident to the California Department of Justice. So any use of force incidences resulting in serious bodily injury gets reported, and they take those reports on an annual basis. So that also falls in line with the comprehensive reporting that was mentioned earlier. And lastly, totality of the circumstances. Again, all facts known to the officer at the time that force had to be used. And this was language that was taken directly out of the penal code. So all the definitions highlighted there are now being added into our policy manual. We added section 300.2.2, which is fair and unbiased use of force. And that says that officers are expected to carry out their duties, including the use of force, in a manner that is fair and unbiased. Again, this is language taken directly from the Senate Bill 230, which is going to be effective January 1 of next year. But more importantly, this actually aligns our use of force policy with NPM 402, our policy section 402, which is racial or bias-based profiling. And that policy bans our officers from conducting that behavior. So we don't train our officers to racially profile or bias-based profile. So the addition of this section here actually co-aligns our use of force policy with another policy section that's always been a part of our manual, or already been a part of our manual. Section 300.33, force options. This is, again, a new section that's being added to our use of force policy, and it's a list of the less lethal force options our officers are actually authorized and trained to use. These options may include verbal commands, which is simply an officer telling someone to stop or put your hands behind your back. They might also include control holds, which is could be a wrist lock or controlling the subject's arm behind their back. Could be pain compliance techniques, which is an officer maybe pushing on various pressure points of a person's body in order to get them to comply. The conducted energy device, which is also known as the taser. Impact weapons, which includes batons that officers carry. Chemical agents, pepper spray, or as we refer to it as OC spray. A canine. A canine is considered a use of force if it's used to actually apprehend an individual. Firearms. Personal body weapons, which includes an officer's hands and feet. Physical controls, if we have to move a person, shove them, or hold a subject down to the ground, we're physically controlling their actions. And an impact projectile, which could be a rubber round that is used that's not likely to cause death, rather than using a bullet or using a round of rubber that is projected towards an individual. One option of force that you'll see that is not listed, and it's actually important to point out, is the carotid control hold. And so the carotid control hold was suspended by, the use of the carotid control hold was suspended by the department on June 29th of 2020, so June 29th of this year. So following the death of George Floyd, we realized that the community began to question the use of this technique. The carotid control hold is oftentimes confused as being a chokehold or a stranglehold. So in response to our community's questions and concerns about this use, the department suspended the use of it. We also realized that the governor's office and lawmakers were taking steps to decertify the use of it as well. As pointed out here on the slide, Assembly Bill 1196, that was passed on August 31st of 2020. And it's sitting on the governor's desk. It was signed, and it's effective beginning January of next year. So we're actually waiting to see what the final result of that assembly bill, what the language is going to be, and we'll update our policy to align our policy with that version of the assembly bill. And if we feel that it doesn't go far enough, we might even take our restrictions even further. So we're waiting to see the final language of that. But as of now, it is suspended, and we actually suspended the use of the carotid before that assembly bill was signed. We added section 300.4.1 chokeholds and strangleholds. We added this because we say it's prohibited, but it's actually putting our practice into written policy because, again, the chokeholds and strangleholds have never been trained on, they've never been utilized or authorized by our officers to use. So we added this saying that it's prohibited. It's a new section, but again, it's always been a part of that, and now it's taking our practice and putting it into writing. So changes are being made to our section 300.5, which is our deadly force applications. So one of the changes here is in section C. As you can see, it says, where feasible, officers shall, prior to the use of force, make reasonable efforts to identify themselves as a peace officer and provide a warning that force is going to be used. So that highlighted section there on highlight C is language that is directly taken from Penal Code section 835A, which we saw earlier in the presentation. We're also adding the highlights that says officers shall not use deadly force against a person based on the fact that, or the danger that that person poses to themselves. So again, we're not going to shoot or use deadly force on a subject simply because they're armed with a knife and they're only posing a danger to him or herself. And again, so that's language that is taken directly from Penal Code section 835A. So that's the new language as a result of the assembly bill as well. And then last on the bottom there, it says officers shall consider their surroundings and potential risk to bystanders to the extent reasonable before discharging a firearm. So we added that, and that again is specific direct language from Senate Bill 230. So section 300.5.2, the displaying of firearms. This is a new section as well, and this again is taking language from the Senate bill that says that we have to have guidelines for when officers display firearms. Section A, I believe the Milpitas Police Department recognizes the sanctity of human life, the value of peaceful resolution, and the preservation of human life is paramount. That speaks to the heart of what our department's culture has always been. Preservation of life is paramount. And in section B, officers shall evaluate the use of other reasonably available resources and techniques. Do all our officers have our guns drawn? If so, that actually limits the use of potential options to help mitigate specific incidents. And then in section D, where it says officers should only draw or exhibit a firearm if the conditions surrounding the incident create a belief that it might be necessary to do so. Again, we train our officers that they should only draw a firearm if the conditions surrounding it call for it. For example, building searches. We don't expect our officers to go in and search a building on an alarm call with just a baton or a taser, because we don't know what threats might be inside the building at the time. So building search is an example when our officers might have their firearms drawn. But again, this is bringing our current practices into policy. In Milpitas, anytime an officer draws his or her firearm or points it at a person, that incident gets documented in a report that's, again, reviewed by a supervisor, and it's routed up to our division captain to make them aware of the incident. We understand that there is a high level of accountability when guns are drawn, and these actions are significant and important. So we document every time that happens. 300.6, the use of force of civilians or by civilian members of our department. So the friendly faces seen here on the picture belong to two of our new community service officers in the department, Libby Rodriguez on the left and Cleo Murphy on the right. The community service officers are a new role in our department, but we also realize that a key point to remember is our community service officers are not armed, with the exception of allowing them to carry OC spray. So there might be instances where our community service officers come across angry individuals because they just got a citation on their car, or they're having their car towed, and they might not differentiate the uniform that our community service officers are wearing from that of our police officers. and our community service officers might be put in a position where they have to defend themselves. So because of that, we recognize that they're going to, there's a potential for force, so we have to add language into the policy that states that yes, our community service officers can use force to defend themselves. However, again, it's going to be the use of OC spray or maybe hands and fists, depending on the nature of the incident. 300.10 training. This is new language, again, that's being written in to our policy, and it's language, again, that's taken specifically and directly from the Senate Bill 230, where it says that all sworn personnel receive periodic training. So what does periodic training look like for us? Again, historically here at the department, we actually review our use of force policy and go over it. Our officers review it every 6 months. Every time we have a shift change, that the use of force policy is gone over and reviewed by all of our officers. We expect our officers to know the policy verbatim at any given time. And this is how we confirm that they know what's in that policy and that they're being properly trained. So our use of force policy is reviewed every 6 months. So it's always been a past practice, but again, the addition of this language puts practice into policy. We have some pending updates. The section 300.12, which is the use of force complaints, and 300.14, which is policy availability. So this is language saying that the department has to receive, process, and investigate civilian complaints about excessive force. So although this language is being added and is new to our policy, we've always had a policy in place on accepting and investigating civilian complaints, and that's including complaints of excessive force. So we have a policy in place for that, but this is specific now for excessive force. And police availability, this is saying that the department has to make the use of force policy available to the public. And the changes that and updates that were being presented this evening, they have not yet been vetted into our use of force policy. So our current version is actually on the, it's available for public view on the city's website. But the department is currently training all of our officers on these updates and that of all the changes being made to the use of force policy. And we also wanted it to present the policy to the public and yourself, which is why we're here this evening, to get more feedback and other considerations on how we might want to update it before we actually publish it and release it into our manual. So the updates, everything that we're talking about tonight, they're not in there yet, but once final approval is, it'll be vetted into our manual, and then that use of force policy will replace the one that's currently on our city's website. De-escalation, 300.2.1. This is the big new section in addition that's being added to our department or use of force policy manual. And again, de-escalation has always been intertwined in our training, but we've never had a standalone policy section for it. So this is the addition of that. So we're going to cover briefly what is listed in de-escalation. So what is de-escalation in law enforcement? And de-escalation, again, are just tactics that our officers use to diffuse a situation, taking a step back and allowing things to slow down. And de-escalation minimizes the need to use force, potentially. De-escalation in law enforcement looks just like this officer here. It could be talking calmly to someone or talking quietly to someone, or getting down on a person's level and talking with them rather than standing over them, trying to get someone to comply and go along with the program. When do we train our officers to de-escalate? Again, when reasonably known circumstances say it's safe to do so, our officers are trained to slow things down in order to reduce this and stabilize the situation. And that actually, again, buys more time to get other resources available to help mitigate it. And examples of other resources might include crisis negotiators, as shown here. And that's actually myself on the right and another crisis negotiator at a yearly training event that our crisis negotiation teams goes to every year. So this event incorporates training with crisis negotiators from departments in 3 other counties, which is San Mateo County, Monterey County, and here in Santa Clara County. There's other resources that we can call on as well. For example, there was an incident with a barricaded subject inside his home with just by himself, but he was experiencing a mental health crisis. He didn't want to come out, but obviously we needed to try and get him help. So we actually had the Mobile Crisis Response Team, which is a unit of the Santa Clara County Department of Behavioral Health. They responded, they're clinicians, and they helped us talk with the subject to mitigate it. And they actually got the subject to comply and come out of the house. And we were able to get him in touch with other resources that he needed. So again, it's the goal of our department for crisis intervention training. All of our officers, and it's the goal of our department to have all of our officers trained in crisis intervention training. So you don't need to be a crisis negotiator itself. So we send all of our officers to that training. And I believe right now we're at about 90% of our officers have received this specific training. And in fact, in the past 5 years, we have had several officers recognized and awarded a crisis intervention award from the county as a result of their actions on different instances. Some considerations to take into account that actually go hand in hand with de-escalation. Our officers are trained to realize and recognize different considerations that might actually be happening that is preventing a subject to comply or do what they're told. And such some examples of that are medical conditions, mental impairment, developmental disability, speaking a different language, having a language barrier. If an officer is telling someone to put their hands behind their back or hands up and they're not following commands, we train our officers to try and take a step back and figure out, well, is there something that is actually preventing the individual from doing that? So we train our officers that these considerations are out there and to recognize them rather than having to use force right away. So taking that time to try and figure out why is the subject not complying. Circumstances and time. Again, if time permits, we're going to try to mitigate the situation by using other resources. And again, that might simply be getting additional officers on scene in order to have different tools deployed in order for use. And that's actually going to be highlighted on the next picture here. Before I start pulling up bullet points for this slide, let's take a look at this picture for a minute, because I think it highlights exactly the different alternatives officers can use to help de-escalate. It looks like everyone has firearms drawn, but the 4 subjects or officers here on the left actually have different tools utilized. So having more officers on scene gives you more options to use rather than having to go directly to deadly force. These officers here are 3 car lengths or even more, depending on how many cars are beyond that, away from the incident. So they've actually created distance from a potential threat. So again, highlight that first bullet point is decreasing exposure to a threat by giving yourself distance or using physical barriers. Those are techniques that our officers are trained. Maintaining control of the scene. That obviously helps de-escalate a situation. Utilizing cover and concealment. Again, what the officers are doing here by using their patrol vehicles. Communicating from a safe position. Giving advisement. Again, distance buys time, and it allows officers to make better tactical situations if necessary. And we also know that an officer's actions can de-escalate a situation. So again, using a calm voice, displaying calm body language. If our officers are rigid and they look like they're anticipating something, that can actually cause someone to escalate more. So body language and the words you use are vital to de-escalation. So objectively reasonable options. Again, if the totality of the circumstances indicate that it's safe to do so, we are going to try to de-escalate. We train our officers to de-escalate the situation, but we understand that situations and events can evolve rapidly and force might have to be used. But again, if force has to be used, it's going to be objectively reasonable, which is stated here on the slide. And once a subject is controlled, the degree of force will then again be de-escalated. So de-escalation, after a subject is complying, if force has to be used and now they're complying, again, de-escalate it down. So some takeaways that we feel are important here at the end of our presentation is, again, many of the changes being made to this policy, our use of force policy, have already been in place. And now we're just putting our current practice into written policy. And again, that's duty to intervene, the banning of chokeholds, comprehensive reporting. Our officers routinely train and review on the use of force policy to ensure understanding and compliance. We're routinely training on the policy. The use of force policy is regularly reviewed to ensure that the practices of our department are aligned with state and federal law, as well as what the community expects. And again, that's why we're here this evening presenting it to you. And historically, de-escalation, the sanctity and preservation of life, has always been at the heart and culture of the Milpitas Police Department. And again, all we're doing is the update to our policy is memorializing our current practices into written policy. And with that, that brings us to the end, and I'll turn it back over to the chair and the commissioners.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. I am going to turn to Tony for questions or comments.
Yes, thank you, Han. We do have a couple of public comments. Let me read those. The first one is from Urvesh Kumar Mehta at a Milpitas PO Box. The comment reads, to the Milpitas City Council members and commission and city staff, I encourage Milpitas Police Department's efforts to keep the city safe. However, incidents like George Floyd's and the 19-year-old shot in Milpitas put a lot of scrutiny with Milpitas reform practices. As police officers, there are many responsibilities to adhere, and also the safety of officers themselves as well. However, as peace and corps officers, we need to understand and do better to keep communities safe with less lethal force and situational awareness. I request City Council Commission to implement the measures suggested, part of 835A Penal Code and 300.3 from Urvesh Mehta. Do you guys want to respond to that, or shall I read the next comment?
I could respond to that, Tony.
Okay, go ahead, Chief Fernandez.
So I do appreciate his comments, and I think that we all are in agreement that we need to use alternative options whenever they're available. He mentions the shooting of the 19-year-old young man, which really took a toll on our officers involved and the rest of the staff. Mental health is a very difficult situation. Whenever we can utilize alternative resources, like Lieutenant Miller was talking about, using the mobile response team, getting our officers crisis intervention trained, we always wish and hope that that is how it ends up, is through dialogue, that the situation is resolved. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. And for those of you that saw the video involving our officer-involved shooting, what changed in that situation was the young man's actions. When he was holding a knife to himself, he was only a threat to himself. And you saw no action from the officer at that point, which is consistent with the policy that Matt spoke about earlier today. The dynamics changed on his actions, and we wish it hadn't have gone that way. Mental health doesn't prevent people from being injured if they're acting irrationally and they're doing some action that's a danger to other people or to an officer. But I would say that we absolutely agree. And by all means, we always try to take that route. And I'll point back to an example before de-escalation was a common term in law enforcement. I'll go back as I was a rookie officer 17 years ago or more. And there was an incident on a street in Milpitas where this young man was nude. He was under the influence of drugs, and he had a large pole, and he's swinging it at officers. And based on the criteria of our use of force policy, we could have used deadly force in that incident, but that's not what happened. Our officers created distance, they worked as a team, and when he was distracted, they went hands-on, knowing very well that they could have been struck by the pole. So as much as we wish that it would work out through dialogue or other means, there are some times where it doesn't go that way. So I just wanted to point that out, and I do appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'll read the second comment we received this evening. Oh, it looks like we've got a third as well. It just came in. I have from Kelly Clark here in Milpitas. They just wanted to say thank you, Milpitas PD and Fire Department and Spring Valley Volunteer Fire Department, for dedicating your lives to serve and protect Milpitas the way that you do. And my next comment I have is from Joseph Weinstein at 626 Hamilton Avenue. I'd like to thank the police department for their consistent response to the community. Ever since I filed a complaint in the 80s and they changed their policy due to that complaint, I work closely with them to provide community feedback on their operations. It is no accident that there's overwhelming support for our police department from the community. Our department received an award from the NAACP this year, and this is the only city where I attended Black Lives Matter rallies that the speakers showed positive support for their city police department. I really appreciate their efforts in Milpitas, and I would also like to express my appreciation to those of you who serve on this commission. And that concludes our comments at this time.
Is it possible to make another comment from me? Can I make a comment?
Of course. Of course, Chief, go ahead.
So I think that's really interesting, and I appreciate that comment from Mr. Weinstein. I mean, he's highlighting since the 80s the cooperation between the Milpitas Police Department and the community. And I think that that practice is still here today. And I think that we can really attribute a lot of those things to Chief Murray back many years ago. And a lot of the policies and things that he's implemented have really stuck with us at the police department. One thing that wasn't pointed out, and I really think it's very important to highlight in this presentation, is that we have very few uses of force. In 2019, we had 3 incidents where uses of force were necessary to take somebody into custody. 3 incidents out of 365 days in a year. And you take that in context of the number of contacts that our officers have. You look at the arrests that they have, and there's violent felons in there. There's all these different things, people under the influence. There's interactions with people with mental health issues. And 3 incidents out of all of them last year ended up being uses of force. So I think that's, I'm sorry, this is 2020. I'm confusing 2 years. Last year, we only had 6 for the whole year. This year, we've had 3. Even so, it's relatively low. It's not many uses of force in comparison to many other cities. And I think that's really speaks volumes to the efforts that our officers that are out there on the front lines take in dealing with people and trying to find alternative solutions to resolve issues. So with that, thank you, Commission. We are available, Matt and I are both available for additional questions. If the Commission has questions or if other community questions come in, we're available for those as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much. And thank you for the service. I know it's hard work to be on the front line to provide us the safety. And yes, Milpitas is a great place for family to raise their children. And with such a close-knit city like this is where we can talk. And this is the only city where I see people, seeing police officers, they will say hi and they talk. They're so friendly. They smile. So thank you. Thank you so much. Moving right into fire. Tony.
Yes, so this evening fire could not attend. Chief Maloon is actually been deployed. He is in the Creek Fire, as I understand it, down in Fresno. He's been there for about a week now. So I've asked for him, for one of his colleagues to report out to us. So the information that I have that they've reported is the SCU lightning fire had been turned over to the local units as of 1500, so that'd be 3 p.m. on 9/10/2020. And full containment was obtained on 9/12/20. Any questions on that one? Otherwise, I'll just kind of move through the bullet points that he gave me.
No, go ahead.
No, okay. Moving forward, the second item was the update on Fire Station 2 project. So for those of you who live up in District 2 area, you might have noticed the fire station is gone. I actually saw it for the first time the other day. I was shocked at how it looks without the fire station standing. But it's been demolished and engineering is working through the construction bid process at this time. City Manager McHarris, if you wouldn't mind correcting me, it's my understanding that the Fire Station 2 at this time is at the corner of 680, what is the frontage road, not Dempsey, Sinclair frontage and Yellowstone, I believe, in a small commercial space with large garage doors. I just happened to catch it out of the corner of my eye.
Is Yosemite.
Yes, at Yosemite and Sinclair frontage. So that is, sorry, City Manager McHarris, you're still muted. I don't know if you had said anything.
No, I was just saying that's correct.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, you literally drive right past it and wouldn't notice it. One of my kids said, wait, but that's his fire station too there. So yeah, it's still in the neighborhood. They've still got a functioning firehouse in the neighborhood there, but it's just moved to the other side of the freeway. And then lastly, update on the COVID testing. So it had been put on hold during the local fire activity. Our resources in the fire department had been fanned out all over the state of California in deployments between strike teams and individual resource requests that had gone out. So we did, for a period of time, put our COVID testing on hold for maybe a period of about 2 weeks, I think it was, if that's correct, City Manager. However, it is back up and running now, and we have also been working with Santa Clara County's Public Health Department and had some stationary test sites in the city of Milpitas. I believe one was just last week, and then we have one coming up on the 21st, so I believe that's Monday. Other than that, no further updates for the fire department unless there's any questions, and I'll do the best I can to answer on behalf of them.
Hey, Tony, if I can I make a comment regarding the SCU complex fire?
Oh, absolutely.
So for those of you who don't know, I'm a volunteer with Spring Valley, and I just wanted to say, having worked on the first day and a half of the Marsh fire, which was the first fire in that complex, being able to work with other agencies, including Milpitas Fire, being able to come together and for that common cause, it actually means a lot to me as not only a volunteer, but also a citizen here in Milpitas, to know that our city fire agency is ready to go and willing to work with the other agencies in the region.
Joe.
Tony, would you?
Oh, go ahead.
Is there any updates on the National Night Out?
It's not, they totally canceled it, I think, for this year. They moved it to October, and then they said, nah, we're not gonna worry about it till next year. I think that's what I seen somewhere posted or something like that. I'm trying to remember. It was on Nextdoor.
So you know what, that's a Milpitas PD event, and since we still have them on the phone or on the call, why don't we defer to them? It's actually on the agenda. It looks like we skipped over it. Chief Hernandez, are you still there?
I am.
Do you have an update on National Night Out?
I do. So for us, National Night Out is canceled. We are assessing, let me see if I can get my video going. I see I'm not there. Can you see me now? There we go. So yes, National Night Out is currently, it is canceled due to the COVID environment. We are reaching out and coordinating with the hosters from last year and also the neighborhood watch captains, trying to ascertain if any are doing virtual meetings. And once we get a confirmation list, we will be attending those virtual meetings. And then also we'll be sharing them through the city manager's office with council for them to attend as well.
Thank you.
Tony?
Yes.
I do want to add just a little bit for National Night Out. I know that some council offices will probably be doing their own as well through virtual. So I know our office is going to be hosting a virtual National Night Out, concentrating in providing the community a crime prevention session on cyberbullying and helping prevent cyberbullying, especially now that our students are being exposed to hours at a time on the computer. So I know that our office is hosting that, and then as soon as I hear if any other council members are doing their own, I'll let you know. So Assistant Chief, if we could maybe connect to see how we could collaborate on the one that we're hosting, even if you just swing by and say a quick message, our office would be greatly appreciative of that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, and we're moving on to status and updates. The 2020 work plans, I don't believe we have much to report, but
Yeah.
let's go towards, okay. Don and Vicky. Vicky's not here. Don, do you have anything to report on the map your neighborhood?
Well, not really, because that's more of a face-to-face event type thing, and I wouldn't.
All right.
That would be kind of difficult to get a Zoom meeting on something like that set up, because it's, how do you connect all these different neighbors without an email address or something of that nature? So you can email them, here's the list and go to it, type of thing.
Yes, and I believe that all these public events will be on hold until further notice from the health department.
Yeah, well, even just giving an email address out to notify them is sometimes difficult. You can post a general, here, click on this thing, and it'll just take you to the meeting. Best we can do is maybe to the neighborhoods on the next door, but you need to count for that too.
Okay, moving on to Neighbor Fest. That's you too, Don.
Yeah.
And
same thing. I mean, that's something that we got together with Daniel at the first of the year, in January, and then everything just went downhill. Because that takes some coordination that, on several levels as far as with Tony and such, and how to approach it.
One thing I do need to mention on that, when we first established NeighborFest, it was for everybody to be a part of, all the commissioners to be a part of, and we received the presentation for it. One of the concerns that I overlooked at the time, though, however, was the fact that we have 4 commissioners established as part of that somewhat committee. It's not really a committee, but that's one of their action items for the commission. Because we have 4, it's too many, and therefore establishes a quorum, and it violates Brown Act. So we actually need to downsize the, again, I say subcommittee in quotations because it's not really a subcommittee, but we do need to eliminate a couple names from that, probably keep it limited to 2. And however, the way Neighborhood Fest is established, it is something that I would anticipate all commissioners will be a part of, not collectively, but it'll be something everyone was trained in and become a part of that event when the circumstances of COVID are lifted and we can go be back out in the community. However, we do need to eliminate some names from that. This is something we could talk offline since Vicky and Jonathan are not here this evening, unless Dawn or Paul would like to withdraw themselves from it.
Well, so I thought that at one of the meetings that we decided that we basically, for this calendar year, NeighborFest would sort of be incorporated with National Night Out. And since we've just heard that National Night Out isn't going to happen, it kind of makes the NeighborFest a moot point, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah. And it's nothing's been done in violation of the Brown Act because we haven't acted on anything. We haven't done anything because it was canceled. It's just a concern of I can't have so many commissioners attached to that program, despite the fact that everyone will participate in their own individual groups or individual situations. We need to reduce the amount of commissioners just so it doesn't have the appearance that we have a Brown Act violation by having so many assigned to it.
Okay,
So at this
you
time,
can remove me from the commission, from that group then,
okay.
Tony.
Okay, well, so I have Jonathan tied to 2, you tied to 2, Vicky tied to 2, and Dawn tied to 3. Dawn, would you be interested in giving it just for the purposes of the assignment to it? However, you will still participate in NeighborFest. Is that something you'd be willing to remove your name from?
Which one?
NeighborFest.
Tony,
Yes, hon.
what if we put that off? Maybe we can exchange emails with Vicky and Jonathan.
Yes, absolutely. That's fine. Doesn't have to be decided this evening. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that we need to make a decision on that one.
Yeah.
And removing anyone's name from it doesn't exclude you from participating. Everybody, like I said, will participate, but we'll revisit this next year when we get National Night Out going again.
Okay. All right. So for Pumpkins in the Park, I don't have anything to update, to report. How about you, Paul?
No, I assume that like most of the external events, that it's kind of on hold. As a matter of fact, under the future items, if you look below it, it says
Yes,
Pumpkin in the Park has been canceled.
Yes.
Yeah, so I spoke with the Parks and Recreation Director, Laurenson, and asked her what the status of the event is this year, and it has been canceled in its physical format. They will be doing, they're anticipating selling pumpkin carving and or decoration kits to the community. So they do want to still do some outreach to the community. However, it's going to change in format for obvious reasons, how things will be done this year.
So it might be more of a flyer type thing where we add some of our flyers into it that would be appropriate.
We could do that. Yeah, absolutely. Director Laurenson did reach out to me and say that if there was something we wanted to include in the packets that were going out to the community, whether it be sold or I don't know the details on that, we could include some information in those as well.
Yeah, one, we could put a cert, at least one item would be the cert and saying it's off until next year for one, what it's about, and then maybe the neighborhood fest, NeighborFest rather, and map your neighborhood, things like that. We could kind of list on there, kind of like what you did when we did the National Night Out.
Yeah, the pass out of the pamphlets and stuff that we do leave the information for.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to Director Laurenson and see what information she'd be willing to let us include.
Future items, brainstorming the possibilities, possible scenarios for emergency preparedness publicity. So I do believe that all these are put on hold or canceled.
Correct. Everything is sort of deferred at this time. This item on the agenda really just more serves as a list that kind of rotates all year long, moving the most recent or upcoming events to the top of the list to keep it on the forefront of our agenda. And yeah, again, items get added on. If anyone comes up with any events that they do know that are coming up in the future year that they'd like to be added on, we can add that on to the list. That way we keep it in our mind as we go through commission meetings, so we can assign volunteers that are interested in participating.
Yes.
But yeah, no updates at this time. Everything as everything else is put on hold.
Right. Okay. Are there any other items that we need to discuss or any comments from all the commissioners? If not, I do need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Paul.
Okay. And Tony, do you take roll or we can all say aye at this time?
I believe we can all say aye on this.
Okay, aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting adjourned at
Aye.
8:24. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone.